I'm Kate, and I'm 29 years old this year. My husband, David, is the same age, and we've been married for 3 years. We have our occasional fights, but we've been getting along well, respecting each other. Both David and I work full-time jobs. Work was fulfilling enough, but since it had been 3 years since we got married, we had started thinking about having kids.
I've decided to get married.
Suddenly, my brother Nathan gathered the family and announced this out of the blue, with no preamble. Not only I, but our parents were also surprised beyond words. Nathan is 35 years old. He works for a great company, is sincere, and is the kind of brother anyone would be proud of. However, I'd never heard of him dating anyone. Nathan has always had little to no interaction with girls since childhood, so when he suddenly announced he was getting married, the entire family was dumbfounded. When we asked for more details, we found out that his girlfriend of 6 months was pregnant, and they decided to rush the wedding. What's she like?
She's bright and straightforward.
Well, since you're so reserved, someone like that might suit you.
Mom said with a smile, and Dad nodded with a grin. Though the news of the shotgun wedding was surprising, it was still good news. Apparently, Nathan had already gone to meet her parents, and now they were asking if we could meet her family. Can I come too?
Of course. I'd love it if you and David could come.
Nathan and David get along well, and Nathan often visits our house. I think Nathan comes more to hang out with David than to see me. David will be happy too. Congrats, Nathan.
Thanks.
Nathan smiled bashfully, looking happy, and it made me happy too. And so the day of the meeting arrived. The 4 of us, my parents, David, and I, were waiting in a private room at the restaurant.
Sorry to keep you waiting.
Nathan burst in a little past the meeting time, looking flustered. Soon after, his girlfriend, Melanie, and what seemed to be her parents, entered. I had heard that Melanie was 2 years younger than Nathan, making her 33. In reality, she looked even younger. She was prettier than I had imagined, and maybe a bit more flamboyant.
My name is Melanie. Nice to meet you.
Hearing her slightly nasal, distinctive voice, David muttered, "Huh? What's wrong?"
Nothing.
The introductions were going smoothly, so I quietly asked David what was up. But after a moment of thought, he just shook his head and said, "It's nothing." I was a bit concerned by David's unusual behavior, but when Melanie started talking to me, I turned my attention back to her.
You're Kate, right? Let's be friends.
Yes, I'd love that. I'm glad to meet you. She smiled at me, and I smiled back. I tried to brush off my uneasiness about David's strange behavior, feeling relieved that Nathan's fiancé seemed like a good person. But it didn't take long before I realized I should have trusted my gut. After their marriage registration, Nathan told us they were planning to have a wedding. Apparently, it was Melanie's strong wish. I could understand that. It's a once-in-a-lifetime event, after all. Melanie was already pregnant, so Nathan wanted to fulfill her wish and have the wedding before her belly started showing. There had been a cancellation at the venue, so the wedding was set for a few months later, which surprised me. Nathan and Melanie decided to live in Nathan's place, which was 3 train stops away from ours. One day, when I was home on a weekday, the doorbell suddenly rang.
Hello.
Huh, Melanie? Standing at the door was Melanie. Other than dropping off a package once, She had never visited our home.
I just came to hang out. You're off today, right?
Before I could fully comprehend, Melanie had already walked into the house without waiting for my permission. I hurried after her, and she was glancing around the house with curiosity. Is Nathan?
It's a weekday. Of course he's at work.
Well, I figured as much, but that wasn't exactly what I meant to ask. Before I could say anything further, Melanie started talking on her own.
I mean, it's so boring being at home. You must get lonely staying home by yourself, right? Hey, I'm thirsty. Could you get me something to drink?
Feeling unsettled, I headed to prepare a drink. But when I returned to the living room, I realized with a start that Melanie had closed the windows and turned on the air conditioning. Since you're pregnant, you shouldn't drink coffee, right? I'm sorry, we don't have anything decaf, so I can only offer you some mineral water.
Oh well, that'll have to do.
Sorry about that. For some reason, I found myself apologizing as I handed her the water. Melanie took a sip and looked around the room, letting out a small laugh.
Such a tiny house.
What?
I heard you didn't have a wedding, right?
She suddenly brought it up. It's been nearly 3 years since David and I got married, and it's true. We didn't have a wedding. At the time, we had been discussing it, but then a pandemic hit. We hadn't made any reservations yet, so that was fortunate. After careful consideration, we both decided to skip the wedding altogether. Neither of us was particularly attached to the idea of a big wedding, so we agreed to save the money for a future home instead. We explained this to both sets of parents, and they were satisfied as long as we took wedding photos, which we did. Well, we weren't really in a situation to do it back then.
But you still haven't had one, right?
We both agreed, and that's how we decided.
Well, you kind of have to say that, don't you?
With an exaggerated sigh, she placed her hand on her cheek. Melanie's lips curled slightly into a smirk.
How sad, not even getting a wedding.
She said it in an exaggerated tone. It wasn't that David didn't let me have a wedding, but Melanie didn't give me a chance to say that.
Your house is so small, and there is no wedding. No kids yet, either.
Well,
That's just really sad. But then again, look at you.
I thought I must have misheard her. But when I saw the mocking smile on her face, I realized she'd really said it. I knew I wasn't as beautiful as Melanie. I wasn't someone who would get compliments for my looks, but this was the first time anyone had insulted me to my face. After that, Melanie started showing up on my days off, regularly belittling me. Looking at the glass I'd left in the kitchen, she'd say things like,
You're such a mess. But I guess you're busy with work, so it can't be helped.
if I stayed makeup-free on my day off, she'd add,
Even on your days off, shouldn't you wear some makeup? Though I guess it wouldn't make much of a difference. Maybe that's why David doesn't see you as a woman anymore.
Every time Melanie looked at what I did, my house, or my appearance, she would smirk and make sarcastic remarks. She wasn't blatantly rude, but she would belittle me with a fake sympathy, saying how unfortunate I was. Since she was Nathan's wife and the wedding was coming up, I didn't want to make a big deal out of it, so I didn't tell Nathan or David or anyone else. But the stress of being constantly belittled was getting to me, and David started noticing.
You don't seem to have much of an appetite, and you don't look well. I think you should see a doctor.
David had been telling me this repeatedly, and though I kept brushing it off, I eventually gave in. I thought it was just stress, but lately, I'd been feeling dizzy and couldn't keep food down. When I finally went to the doctor, I was in for a surprise.
Why did you suddenly ask everyone to come over?
My mom seemed anxious as we had called both of our parents and Nathan's family over to our house. David and I exchanged a small smile at her knees. Actually, I'm pregnant. When the doctor mentioned the possibility of pregnancy, my first thought was no way. We had started thinking about kids, but lately, that hadn't been on my mind due to everything else going on. I thought it was stress, but it turned out to be morning sickness.
Pregnant.
Yes, it's still early, though.
Kate,
Nathan suddenly shouted and then pulled both David and me into a tight hug. When I looked up in surprise, I saw tears welling up in his eyes.
congratulations. I'm so happy, it feels like it's happening to me.
Nathan. Seeing him like that brought tears to my own eyes. My parents were tearing up too, and soon we were all looking at each other and laughing. As we were chatting happily as a family, I felt a gaze on me. I turned my head in the direction of the stare and froze. Melanie was glaring at me with a frightening expression.
Hey, about Melanie.
Yeah. Later, after we got home, David hesitantly started to speak.
I think she was giving you a really scary look.
So David had seen it too. After Nathan had spoken to her, Melanie had quickly masked her expression with a smile, so I thought I was the only one who had noticed. Seeing David's concerned face, I thought maybe it was time to stop staying quiet. The truth is, I told him how Melanie had started dropping by unannounced ever since she married Nathan, and how she kept making snide remarks every time she came. As I struggled to put my feelings into words, David listened silently. That's why I'd like to keep my distance for a while.
I think keeping your distance is a good idea too.
Yeah, but she might just show up at the house. So what should I do?
Why don't you stay at your parents' place for a while?
Go back to my parents.
Yeah, with the morning sickness. You're not feeling great anyway. You can still commute to work from there, right? Hearing all this, I'd feel better if you were with your parents for now.
Hearing David say that made me feel relieved. I wasn't planning on telling my parents about what was going on. I didn't want to ruin Nathan's happiness so soon after his wedding, and I didn't want to blow things out of proportion. But now I had the perfect excuse to go back to my parents. My morning sickness.
Still, why do you think she's targeting you so much?
I don't know. We first met at the family introduction. By the next time we met, she was already acting like that, so I really don't know why.
I think I've seen her somewhere before.
What? Where? Now that I think about it, David did have a strange reaction during the family introduction.
Well, I'm not completely sure.
David didn't elaborate, but he said he'd try to look into it. A few days later, we learned something shocking. After moving back to my parents' house, David started visiting more often, and Melanie's unannounced visits stopped, bringing some peace to my life. My morning sickness had also started to ease by the time Nathan and Melanie's wedding day came, which arrived without any incidents. After my parents left early to get to the venue, David and I were finishing up at home when Melanie called.
Oh, have you already gotten ready?
Yes, we're just about to leave.
Sorry, but you don't have a seat at the wedding.
What?
My family and friends are coming today, and it'd be embarrassing for them to think someone like you is family. So, don't come to the wedding.
What?
You might try to dress up, but with your looks, there's only so much you can do, right?
Melanie laughed on the other end of the line.
The day's all about me. You understand that, right?
Does Nathan know about this?
Of course, he wouldn't say no to me.
I see. Well, after the wedding, I'd like to talk to you.
I'll think about it. Don't forget to leave your wedding gift, okay?
She hung up abruptly after that. I stood there in shock, and David looked at me, confused. Melanie said I'm too embarrassed to come to the wedding. As I said it, I couldn't hold back my tears.
That's awful.
It's Nathan's wedding, but apparently he's okay with it. David gently rubbed my back, letting out a determined sigh.
I'll find out the truth and talk to Nathan. He wouldn't tell you not to come to his wedding.
David seemed quietly angry.
And I'm still curious about that other thing. We need to get to the bottom of this, for Nathan's sake too.
You're right. Thank you. A week after the wedding, Melanie came to the restaurant alone where I had asked to meet her.
Huh?
She seemed surprised to see that I wasn't alone. And who wouldn't be? It wasn't just David and me. Both sets of our parents and Nathan were also there.
What's going on? No one told me about this. Did something happen today?
Yes, you asked me to have the wedding gift ready, didn't you?
As for that, I was just kidding. You didn't have to go through all this.
Before we hand it over, there's something I need to talk about. She seemed confused as to why no one else was speaking. Melanie glanced nervously around the room. Melanie, you used to work for Bright Tech Industries before getting married, right?
What about it?
And why did you leave?
Of course, it's because I got pregnant and was getting married. Nathan was fine with it, so why are you bringing this up now?
Fine with it? I didn't say anything about you quitting, but you just up and left because you were pregnant. You didn't even discuss it with me.
Nathan sighed in frustration.
But we already talked about this.
That's when David stepped in.
Actually, Bright Tech Industries is one of our company's partners. It's basically a subsidiary, so we get a lot of internal information.
What?
Melanie was speechless when David said that, clearly realizing there was no way out.
I thought I'd seen you somewhere before. You had an affair with your married boss, didn't you? That's why you quit.
That's...
Your parents knew about this, didn't they?
David turned to Melanie's parents, who had been silent until now, and they let out a deep sigh.
We're so sorry.
She told us she was being blackmailed by her boss, and we believed her. We're truly sorry.
We thought it was in the past and all dealt with.
Melanie's parents apologized deeply.
But what? I told you I was forced into it. It's over now.
Over?
Nathan's voice rumbled like thunder, and Melanie flinched. With a heavy sigh, he laid out several photos on the table in front of everyone.
How do you explain this?
The photos showed Melanie with a middle-aged man, walking arm in arm into a hotel.
After the wedding, I heard from Kate and David. I was shocked to learn you were still having an affair with your former boss.
In just 1 week, Nathan had gathered all this evidence. After the wedding, we talked to Nathan about Melanie. We told him how she had banned me from the wedding, how she'd been making snide remarks to me for a while, and about her affair that led her to quit her job. Nathan had been under the impression that I wasn't at the wedding because my morning sickness was too severe, according to Melanie. Nathan had apologized for everything, even though none of it was his fault. When we asked what he was going to do, he said he would investigate for himself. 1 week later, Nathan said he was ready, and I called Melanie to meet us. Nathan had also invited both sets of parents to the meeting.
Everyone here already knows.
That's why they were all called here. Melanie froze, her hands still reaching for the photos, realizing the futility of it all.
You've been harassing Kate too, haven't you? Why?
Melanie scowled and muttered under her breath.
I don't know. She's way uglier than me, but seemed so happy. It pissed me off. Her family gets along great, and now she's pregnant too. I was supposed to be the star.
So that's why you didn't want her at the wedding?
Obviously, it was my big day, and it wouldn't make sense for anyone else to be congratulated.
As if this was the most natural thing in the world, Melanie said it so matter-of-factly, leaving everyone shaking their heads in disbelief.
I'm filing for divorce.
No,
You think you still have a say in this?
I am pregnant. How are you going to take responsibility?
Melanie stood up and placed her hands protectively over her stomach, shouting,
If the baby's really mine, I'll still pay child support after the divorce if it's mine.
In the end, Nathan and Melanie divorced. Although Melanie put up a fight, it was clear she was at fault, and the case didn't even go to trial. When Nathan's lawyer threatened to pursue a high settlement if it went to court, Melanie settled for a small amount of compensation. After the baby was born, they did a DNA test, and it turned out the child wasn't Nathan's.
I figured.
Nathan said, looking a bit pained. Since the baby was born within 300 days of the divorce, legally, the child was considered Nathan's. It was a hassle, but they had to go through the legal process to deny paternity. Though with the DNA results, there wasn't much to worry about. Apparently, Melanie continued her relationship with her former boss even after everything, and his wife found out again and sued her for damages. This was the second time she'd been caught, once when she quit her job and again now that they had divorced. The first time, Melanie's parents paid the settlement for her, but after this, it seemed they had finally disowned her. For some reason, Melanie kept reaching out to Nathan, begging him for help, and Nathan told us about it, sounding exhausted. About a year after everything had happened, I received a call. Hello.
What are you doing?
Melanie's shrill voice rang in my ears. David looked over at me, startled, while standing near the baby's crib. Melanie was frantic, and though her words were jumbled, she repeatedly yelled that it was my fault for not responding to her calls, and that since she had been made so unhappy, she would make me miserable too. Your situation is because of your own actions.
Shut up. I won't be satisfied until you suffer like I have. If you keep ignoring me, I'll burn your entire apartment down.
Her threat left me pale. David, who had been listening in, immediately called the police. Melanie was arrested shortly after. Thankfully, The police arrived before she could set the fire, but she had already tried to force her way into our apartment, damaging the door and breaking a window, which led to her being arrested for vandalism. After that, we were so afraid of Melanie's stalking that we moved into the new home we had been planning to build. We no longer live in the apartment Melanie knew about. That's the one relief we have. Though things have been busy with raising the baby, our life has been filled with joy and laughter. Nathan visits often, and he dotes on the baby. Recently, Nathan mentioned he's seeing someone new and, sometimes shyly, asks David and me for advice. Next time, let us meet her before you decide to marry, okay? I teased him lightly, and Nathan gave a sheepish smile and replied,
I'm counting on you.